putting together a presentation is more than a series of slides. It's
How are you taking them on a journey? People love to be on journeys.
If you don't love yourself and love your story, you will never be able to tell it effectively.
Welcome again to the No Fear Presenting podcast. I'm Mike Teixeira, your host. Today's guest is Amy Sterndale, founder of Sterndale Strategic. Her career path has taken her through the publishing industry, marketing, TEDx events, public policy, and most recently, advising entrepreneurs through the New Hampshire Small Business Development Center. All the while, she has worked with companies of all sizes to improve their communications to create stronger, healthier organizations and communities. That's a mouthful, but I want you to know that I'm really happy to have you here. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me. I need that language you just wrote to put on all of my social media. It's way better than anything I do to describe myself. So I'd love that. Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome to it. You're welcome to it. I'll do a quick copy paste for you. Hey, so I thought what I'd really like to do here is get people to know you a little bit before we, talking about all the wonky communication stuff. So would you mind telling us a little bit about where you grew up and if you had communication role models when you were growing up?
Oh, like communication role models. Yeah. That's a great one. Let's see. I was born in Connecticut, but mostly grew up in New Jersey, and I was lucky. Both of my parents were kind of adventurers, so I got to grow up a little bit overseas as well. So
Wait a minute. You grew up in Jersey? I don't hear a Jersey at all.
I know. Well, so here's that story. When I first moved to Portsmouth, I was 19 and I went into a bar. I snuck in. I was not old enough to be there. There was an open mic night and it was packed house. The comedian said, "Anybody here from Jersey?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I'm from Jersey." I'm raising both hands and everybody looks at, he looks at me, he goes, "What exit?" And I'm 19 years old and I've never heard this joke.
Right.
Because I grew up in like the preppy part of New Jersey, where all the Wall Street people commute into the city from. And
freeway humor doesn't work with me.
Yeah, no, I learned it later. But yeah, no, reminder, it is the Garden State. So I did grow up in the greener part. Never had the accent, grew up there mostly, and then got to live in France a little bit in the Middle East with my dad.
Really?
He grew up in the Middle East. So it was great. Gave me a lot of perspectives on different cultures and just that this is a very, very big world.
Yeah.
So I was lucky with that. In terms of, I went to school. I went to a tiny school called Simon's Rock College in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. No one's heard of it. It's got 300 students. And then I realized that was very expensive and dropped out and finished at UNH after I got my residency when I moved to Portsmouth on a whim, as I said, when I was 19. So I think that, early on, I was a really big book nerd. I loved reading. I loved book publishing. My career started at bookstores, and then I moved to New York and worked at Random House. So I always thought I was going to be a book editor because that's the cool part of being in books.
Right. You can say yes, no, get out of here.
Redlining everything, power. I years ago, I dated a poet, and we used to joke that he would create and I would destroy because I do still edit quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But when I got to Random House, I realized I did not have nearly the skill sets that the editors there had. But I really loved marketing, and because I got in as a marketing assistant, I lucked into that job and found a tiny cheap apartment in Brooklyn. And I loved my bosses. I mean, everyone there was just at the top of their game. So it's an incredible place to be educated when you're in your 20s. But the whole psychology around how do you get someone to move? How do you get someone to make a decision different than what they're currently planning on doing?
Right.
Whether that's toothpaste or buying this book or where to go on vacation. How do you, the psychology of connecting to what do they care about, what moves them, and how to kind of put that in front of them in the right way. Yeah. It's just a fantastic puzzle. Oh. So it turns out I was better at that. I stayed there for a while. I worked for another publisher. I moved back to New England and then had a few different businesses along the way around kind of communications, public relations. We worked in public policy for a while as a communications director there. So hopefully we talk about that a little today. I got to work with a lot of just experts. That was the first time when I was in New York, I worked with a lot of famous people. I worked with a lot of people that I was just very lucky.
I saw the list on your website. I've got some questions, so we'll get to that.
Yeah, there are questions. But it was a terrific time to sort of get to be in those rooms with people who, professionally, my colleagues at the top of the game, and then also just people professionally, politically, in their business world, their writing worlds, just absolutely just nailing it. And then to move to a public policy world where you're still working with experts. These folks are brilliant at just the demographic analysis and statistics and understanding big data sets and what it means for you and me and for low-income families in our communities and for decisions that politicians make and for how tax dollars could best be spent. But when you're a researcher, you're not trained in how to explain to a politician, for example, what your data means.
Yeah.
So that was a fun journey to get to work with brilliant academics and help them to translate their story into something that you and I and the editors of the New York Times all want to read.
Right.
That was the goal, was trying to get attention and try to make the story something that was instantly recognizable to you and me as something that mattered.
Yeah, I'm struck by how similar our paths are, because it wasn't until I worked with scientists that I realized this is where the majority of us live. We don't train typically to get in front of people, to move them, to speak. What we train to do is our discipline, the thing we love, be it animal husbandry, be it whatever building. And it is, I think, a wonderful place to arrive to say, hey, there is a service I can deliver to the world by helping folks who have trained for a majority of their life for something else, and get them to be comfortable in front of folks speaking. Yeah, that's wonderful. So is that how you arrived to what you're currently doing? It was that experience through the policy world that got to you. Yeah,
I think it's just been sort of a pattern all along of getting to hear different ways that people present a story or pitch an idea, and how it lands or doesn't, and how they might have the best idea in the room, but if they're not presenting it the best, they're not going to win the day. So it's really just the difference between that and the important, you and I know this all day long. We can argue that every problem comes down to a communications problem so often.
Right.
The data's there, the facts are there, the money might be there, but if you don't have the communications right, you're not going to get everyone on board. You're not going to help people to understand what the real goals are or what the value is of, again, making a different decision. How do you move people to either understand something in a new way or value what your expertise is?
Yeah.
And it's got to meet them where they're at, right?
What strikes me though, I gotta challenge you on something.
All right, do it.
The expression, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I feel like communication people are like that, and I feel the same way. I think that I have two hammers. I have everything can be solved through either design or communication. Those are my two hammers, but it's true. I think a lot of the world, if we spoke better and if we connected better, we could solve a majority of the problems.
Let's acknowledge that you and I are no better than every other expert in their field in the whole world, where they will argue their expertise is what matters.
Right.
On another podcast, I could tell you a story about when my son was very little. He was sick with something that we couldn't figure out, and he's fine now. And it turned out to be fixable. But for about a year, we went to 26 different experts. All, Western medicine, Eastern medicine, with a young mom kind of freaking out, trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And the experience that I left with, a story that I still is on my to-do list to sort of write an article about, was everyone had a hammer.
Right.
Whether it was Western or Eastern, whether it was a chiropractor or a neurologist, everyone said, oh, well, clearly he's deaf. Let's do your hearing test. Oh, it turns out he's not deaf. Well, good luck. We don't know. And you would go one after another to all of these experts. And the one that finally won the day started the conversation with saying, I want to tell you, I teach at Harvard and I have no idea what's going on with your son.
Oh,
and
wow.
that was such a beautiful moment to just have knowledge that we don't know everything. And and I think that's really, we talk about this in public speaking, that vulnerability, it really helps you not only connect with each other, but just acknowledge, of course, everything isn't a nail for my hammer, but he was able to sort of open up a different conversation, and we figured it out, and he needed a couple little surgeries and he's good to go. But it was a journey of understanding all of these experts and professionals that their whole job is to know everything, or to at least try to solve everything. They really could never get beyond their lane.
Yeah. You're saying so many good things. I want to hop on a thought here. The vulnerability, I believe it, when someone can display that in a true sense, it really changes a presentation to a conversation. You know what I mean? It acknowledges that you're also there to learn, and often looked over. Like, I don't want to be vulnerable in the room. I want to come to the table as the expert. I want to, and it's that dichotomy that you really show strength through weakness or softness or openness to learn as well as teach.
I mean, it's a great presentation lesson for our clients, but it's just a life lesson. I think the more that we show up in that space of saying, I'm not really sure, I have some thoughts, let's work this together, let's work the problem. But also, I'm a huge fan of self-effacing stories.
Right, and, same here,
and just showing just how imperfect we all are. I think we've all attended, and I think all your listeners have attended a talk where there were a lot of slides, there was a lot of data, and they walked out, and if you said, well, what was that about? They say, I'm not quite sure, but I think the speaker was very smart.
Right.
I think the speaker was very, very smart. That's all I know, because they were very complicated and it was very smart. And I'm not really sure exactly what they were saying.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge. If you can get that speaker who we know is an expert and is showing up on the stage with that confidence of a lifetime of training in being very good and trusted and respected in whatever their expertise is, and getting them to pause and think first about who's in the audience. What do they know? Let's meet them where they're at today, and let's show our humanity, and let's show our mistakes we may have made along the way, and let's tell a story or two that helps them feel like we're just another human, and we're here to help them to learn something. We want them to leave the room not with, gosh, I guess they were really smart. I'm not sure what happened there, but to say, I now understand that when this happens, that climate change is affected in this way, or when you invest in this population, rises all boats, whatever it is, you've got to know what the story is you're telling. And then you've got to make sure that everyone in the room comes along for that story. Yeah. It's a thing that we would do a lot when we worked with TEDx speakers, to remind them, because it's a day-long event of listening to experts live in a room and saying, you've got hundreds of people in the room. They all have different backgrounds. No one gets left behind. Yeah. So making sure that you bring them, make sure that you stop, you explain language and all of the, the insider baseball kind of stuff that we do when we're just talking to other experts, that you bring everybody along for the ride so they feel like they're part of it. But Mike, the vulnerability is so key. Yeah. Because it just, honestly, it makes you more likable. It makes you more, and if I like you, I'm more likely to trust you. I think, it's liking and then trusting and then respecting. It's sort of a journey that you go as a speaker to really get people to buy in. It's so much more of a relationship than, here's another data. Here's more data that I crunched, and I'm very good at crunching this data, or I'm very good at thinking about this very robust analysis. But if you can't get, if you don't know what the goal is of the presentation, of your career, of your work, you can't sort of make plans in each of your presentations to know, today, here's what I want people to remember.
Right. And it goes back to that actionable part you were talking about, right? It's thinking about the end in the beginning. It's what do I want this audience to leave empowered with so that they can be spreaders of my word. They can act on the information I'm sharing. If you are a selfish speaker, you're all about, I want to look like a professional. But if you are a selfless speaker, you are thinking, how does this information get distributed and how does it get reused and how does it cause action, right?
So well said.
Yeah. All right. Wow. All right. We're diving into the deep end. I want to...
I knew it. I knew that would happen. Here we are.
I want to hit the rewind. So I did not know that you grew up going from country to country. I think, wow, what an amazing opportunity to look at different cultures and see the way people interact with each other. Is there anything you took away from that kind of childhood that you look back now and you say, wow, that really made an impression on me?
So I want to clarify, I'm not quite a military brat. I mostly grew up in New Jersey. I had about a year and a half in France, outside of the 8th largest city. So it was Nantes in southern Brittany. And I was 15, 16 years old. And then a year before that, I was in Abu Dhabi when it was not yet Abu Dhabi. So this is, I'm not going to say the date because I'm now getting old enough that I'm supposed to not do that. But I was very young. I was probably 13 years old. And
so from Jersey to Paris to Abu Dhabi, very different
places. Yeah. My dad grew up in Beirut and in different parts of the Middle East. His parents have great backstories. My grandmother was British. My grandfather was from Colorado. And they were sort of Quaker missionaries. Quakers don't really do missionary work, but they founded a bunch of the Friend schools in the Middle East, and they worked and taught there and raised their kids there. So he grew up in that culture and then went back there later in life. And, the thing about Abu Dhabi in that moment in time, which I'll just say is the kind of the early mid 80s, is oil had been discovered in 1973 in the United Arab Emirates. So before that, it was just fishing villages. There was nothing there.
Oh, I gotcha.
And so at the moment he was brought in, he was an Ivy League business guy who spoke Arabic. And so he was perfect for the moment. There was suddenly this monarchy that had a lot of cash and brought in all of these Western businessmen, mostly men, probably all men, to help them, advise them on how to manage their money. And so he worked for the nephew of the king. And my experience was the entire city, and there's probably great video about this, but the entire city was built all at once. If you think about New York City, it was built and then it was built and then it was built in more cities in the States. But if you suddenly have billions of dollars and yesterday you were a fishing village, you're going to build the whole thing at once. And so men from, again, almost entirely men from countries all over the world were coming there to work. And so the ratio of men to women when I was there was 11-1.
Wow.
11 men for every one woman. And of those one women, it would be she would be fully covered.
Of course,
because it's the Middle East. So I was blonde, 13 years old, marrying age at that point, right?
Of course, right.
And it was 110 degrees, so I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, which did not last. And men would just come up come up to me on the sidewalk and ask me what my dowry was. So it was an unusual. So for a kid from Jersey, it was an incredible experience to just understand how very big the world is. I now have 2 teenagers. I think all the time, how can I expand their world? We've been able to do some travel. We haven't lived overseas. That's not really how my career has panned out, which is fine. But I really think it's the most important gift my parents gave me. And then my mom was a French teacher, and so she did a cool Fulbright swap where she got to live. We swapped houses, jobs, and cars with a family that came to the States and lived in our house for a year.
Yeah.
And so just a really cool immersion experience.
The true value to that is I'm convinced that if you travel a year, you eliminate the tendency to be a racist. You really do. A racist or judge people on their gender or whatever. Go out, make friends in different cultures. Then you'll look at the world with a completely different lens.
100%. This is called No Fear presenting. It's I think so much about racism and just all of our misunderstandings about each other is just entirely fear-based. And that's not my area of expertise. That's just my observation. When we don't understand someone different than us, it's probably psychology 101 to have fear until we understand. So that those immersion opportunities, and we just don't have enough of them.
Yeah. I'm no expert either, but I had the same assumption. And that's why I wanted to do this, so that we could all learn together about how much fear drives these poor decisions we make when we communicate. And so it's a fertile ground. All right. Yeah. So it's great stuff. One thing that I ripped out of your bio because I wanted you to tell the story is your first experience in public speaking. It's very cute. So will you tell the story of your first time public speaking and how you discovered you had a knack for it?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So I was going to say, I forgot, but I did tell you that. So I signed up for a class, and I was probably my freshman year of high school, and I was it was a class in public speaking, and the teacher was very strict. She was very old, and
which goes hand in hand, being strict and old.
Go hand in hand, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I had already gotten into theater, so I was interested in presenting. I knew I had some ability to be on stage, and I'm a bit of a ham, so I knew that I could do something, but I didn't know any of those skills, and it did come to me quite naturally. And so I gave a talk on Lena Horne, who is, for folks who love music, she's a famous jazz singer. She's she's a civil rights activist. She just has this incredible story. Everything that she lived through had to survive. But I so enjoyed the topic that I probably was very animated and very passionate, and I practiced it a lot. Again, strict teacher. I was very afraid of her. And it was the only A+ that I ever got in my entire career, academic career, ever. We're not going to talk about the rest of my transcripts, but that I will be very proud of. And I think that was an early indication. I was like, okay, so I have some game here.
This is like an area where I should focus. That's awesome. All right. So that's how you discovered your knack for communications and public speaking. A lot of thoughts about culture and listening. I love that. I want to dig into that a little bit deeper. I'm noticing a lot of hand movements. I'm wondering, did that come from your family? Did that come from your culture? Of course, if you're listening to this podcast, you're not going to see Amy's hands moving all over, but I love when someone is just so comfortable in expressing themselves with their hands, because you can see I do it too.
I think I'm way too British to be able to explain why I have this many hand movements. My genetic background is not, and I don't know that either of my parents were certainly comfortable. They were certainly comfortable speakers. My dad ran organizations, and my mom was a teacher. But I think it's probably just a nervous tick as much as anything else. Gives my body something to do while I'm speaking. But I don't know. I think that's.
All right. So now let's shift a little bit. Let's go to the Carsey School of Public Policy. I find that really intriguing, especially in this time right now where there's so much discussions about policy and how complex it is or how big it is and what the right mix is in our society. So tell me a little bit about the Carson public school policy. Is that correct?
So when I started there, it was actually the Carsey Institute. It wasn't even a school of public policy yet. And it was founded, Marcy Carsey was a TV producer from our childhood. She produced Roseanne and Third Rock from the Sun and The Cosby Show, and has just done a lot of good across the country with the wealth that created. But she was a UNH grad, and so she invested in this project, mostly looking at rural populations, women and girls, and then it's grown to be many things, including some international programs. But it was a really interesting. It was my first time working with academics. I'd always been in corporate and nonprofits before then, and it was a really interesting experience because, again, you have this. If you choose academia as your career, your greatest strength is to absolutely be the expert in the room, whatever room you're in. And
Right.
it's not to say that they don't have humility. It's not to say that they're not always learning themselves and leaning into the developments in all of their research, but they have to be that confident. And that's in many ways what they're trained to do. They teach classes and they do research and write.
Oh, I'm fascinated by this. Let me dissect that. I don't want to derail you, but
No.
You say they have to be confident. Why do you feel they have that pressure they have to be confident when they walk into the room?
Great question. I think if you came across as unsure in what you felt was the correct analysis or exploration of a topic, I think that your community would struggle to see the benefit in your offerings.
Oh my gosh, that's an interesting point. Sort of like it's a early detection system. If they see fear, if they see doubt,
right,
they assume this is not academically rigorous or really researched or backed. Huh. Interesting.
Or if you showed up and said, I'm not sure if this is true, but I'm kind of looking into this. If I don't have the bandwidth to sort of take on your project, I might say, well, Mike's not even sure. He's spent time on this.
Good point. Right?
There's probably nothing there. Let's go look over here. So but the point is, and they really are, I mean, they're brilliant at what they do and what they know. But here's an analogy I think a lot of people might appreciate. A lot of people complain about general contractors who come to their home, fix things around their house, right? Mm-hmm. Some of them, they're in a perfect world, they're all good at what they do. They all know how to stand up a house. They all know how the details that I don't understand, that I count on them to understand. They are in pulling permits and everything about it. That is what they know how to do. That is what they're trained how to do. A subset of all of those general contractors also happen to naturally be good at communications.
Right.
Those are beloved.
Well,
they're not better better contractors, but those are the ones when you talk to your friends and say, hey, I need a painter, I need a contractor, I need a mason for my house. People are like, don't call so-and-so. They never called me back. They never communicated. We're terrible communicators. They're not really trained as communicators. So that's just an analogy that sort of a lot of people could probably relate to because everyone has a contractor story, but it's not necessarily what they're trained to do. And with academics, some of them are just natural and they can really tell a story that can connect with an audience. But most of the time, it's harder and they don't get enough training in that space. So I'll give you one example of how much energy there has been lately in supporting this need. So the National Science Foundation, this is years ago now, but they sort of did a dog and pony tour around the country to different universities. And I attended the one that came to New Hampshire. And I kid you not, this was I'm not exaggerating, an 11-hour meeting. It was one day. We started at 7 a.m. We finished at 6 p.m. I was in one very hard chair for that entire day.
Was there a tray of cookies at the back of the room?
We didn't move around. There were snacks. There was coffee. There was lunch. It wasn't cruel, but it was a packed room of, communicators and researchers. And the National Science Foundation created this dog and pony show of TV producers, magazine editors, media trainers to spend an entire day helping researchers get their heads around how to better communicate their research. So there were lots of screens and they brought in lots of slides and examples. There was, some play acting going on, all the ways not to do it. But we learned so much that day. I took pages and pages of notes and I came out of there with all kinds of big ideas around how to change the world of research communications.
Right.
But the single best data point that I have referred to many times since that meeting, which I find so profound, and I know you know this because you also work on the design side, which I do not do, very bad at design, is your brain, they put up this, on the screen, this picture of a brain, and they had a neurologist up there speaking, and he said, here's the pathway that your brain uses when it's listening. And here's the pathway your brain uses when it's reading. And those two pathways cannot physically work at the same time.
Yep. There's no overlap.
And you know this.
Yep.
And that's why every single PowerPoint in the history of the world is hard. And that's why people have come to hate most PowerPoints, not yours, because you know how to do it right. But you've seen all of the bad ones. Yep. You've seen all of the 12-point fonts and the lists of bullet points, and whether people are reading those, which is very boring to listen to, or they're saying something completely different. A lot of presenters don't understand that if that piece of science is true, you can't do those two things at the same time. You have to acknowledge everyone in your audience is making a choice. They're either listening to what you're saying or they're reading the screen. Right. But they're making a choice, and you don't want them to make a choice. You want them all to stay with you. And so that really helped me. Again, I had research to bring back to my academics to say, here's why we're going to do it differently. Here's how this is going to go better. Because a lot of them do, in fact, have to speak to other audiences. They've just talked to municipal organizations and political
people with
groups.
No background in what they're speaking about.
Absolutely none.
Yeah. And so the way I sometimes challenge the more difficult clients is to say, do you want people to understand what you are talking about, or do you just want to get through it? Because if you just want to get through it, maybe we got to pass the baton to someone else. And that usually kind of diffuses
That's a great way to think about it.
The stubbornness to say, no, my desire here is for them to understand it. Then bringing out those scientific facts.
Right.
Super, super powerful.
Really, really powerful. The other one that really came across that day, and I think we know it to be true, but it really helped, was if I give a presentation to you for 20 minutes and it's compelling, I engage you, it's a good presentation. Let's assume I do it well. A week later, if someone else asks you, and my speaking clients know I say this all the time, if you're at a cocktail party a week later, you've been in the audience for this talk, and they say, did you go to that talk of Amy's? What was that about? Was that good? What was the takeaway? How many things do you think they're going to remember about what I said a week ago? Literally, how many things? 5 things? Maybe not. Maybe 3.
I think it's 3. Yeah, max, right?
3 or 2 or 1.
Right.
And because it's 3 or 2 or 1, and often it's 1, we need as speakers to know what the 1 is.
Right.
Because if we don't know what it is, they're going to pick it from all of the things we said. And so if we pick it first and we say, if they only remember one thing, I need it to be, 2 plus 2 is 4. Then you're going to mention throughout the talk how 2 plus 2 is 4. And you're going to talk about it in different ways. So different learners, different listeners connect with it in different ways. But everyone at the end of the talk, 2 plus 2 is 4 all day long. And they're going to remember that next week and next month. And now you've met your goal of getting that key message across. They may remember other things. We hope so. But it doesn't always happen.
One of my favorite tactics is when a speaker just flat out says, if you walk out of here with one thing, this is the one thing I want you to walk out of here with.
Yeah, I use that all the time.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question here that I'm generally curious about and I struggle with.
Okay.
I think that there is a misperception in organizations that everyone should speak on their topics. Yeah. Everyone should present on their topics. I believe that there are people who are naturally gifted. I believe there are people who are coachable and want to get there, and so they will get there. But I believe there are some people with whatever psychological hurdle, fear, sometimes overall like a physical reason they're not good at relaying information. Shouldn't feel that pressure, shouldn't be forced in front of a room of people.
Absolutely.
Do you agree with that? Yeah.
I do agree with that. I think that, what we often find ourselves working with is addressing the different fears people have about speaking and helping them to work through them, helping them to remind them that it's that so often what people forget is everyone in the room is probably rooting for you. When you are giving a talk, they're not coming in going, "Oh, we're taking her down. We're gonna get this one alive." That's not how they tend. They tend to want to know what you have to learn, and they tend to value and appreciate your willingness to put this talk together. But just in the same way that I will never be a quarterback of an NFL team or a women's soccer team or any, there's lots of things that I'm not going to be the one to do. It's just important that every organization what I would say is they make sure that they value each of those people for what they're bringing to the table, because of course everything is a team effort. And so when you were saying that, I found myself thinking I would only worry about that person who never wants to do the public speaking, that they make sure that their boss is still valuing in other ways and supporting them to make sure their career can do whatever they want it to do, even if it's never with the spotlight on them. It takes all of us together to create the content, to create the knowledge, and to communicate it well. But not everybody wants this part.
The burden is on. Partially, the burden should be on the organization to have some sort of litmus test in place, some sort of resource internally to say, this is a good speaker. This person is trainable. This person needs a team environment. This person is brilliant in whatever they bring to and I'm adamant about that because of an experience I lived. I was working for a group who developed personal care products. So shampoo, deodorants and stuff. And there was this one woman, a chemist, and she came from a culture where standing up was not acceptable. She would physically shake and sweat, but she was brilliant. She was so good in the chemistry. And I think of her, because I was too young back then to stand up and come up with a solution. I think of her often. And every time I see someone now struggle with that, I say, okay, if you're really a company invested in your success, if you really want to win this client, get that funding, whatever, how are you going to help this person shine? And it's okay to let that person stand up and show the data, or give that person credit while you're presenting their data in the room and say, this all came from Amy. Amy did this research, and Amy discovered that that is true teamwork, compensating for each other's weaknesses. And let's get rid of this BS where, everybody has to be an amazing communicator.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because we want everyone to feel proud of their contribution. And it does come across in different ways. So let me ask you the question then. If you had that person, you've probably had other experiences like that you work in a lot of different corporate environments, right?
Right.
So when you have those kinds of team members now, you know how to support them, but do you find you can help their team or their bosses to recognize that it's not that they need to be the presenter, that their value is in fact, similar but different?
In doing the chemistry or whatever. Yeah. Like everything, I think that's a half and half situation. Sometimes I can pull the leadership apart and say, hey, look, let's look at it this way. Let's think about reworking your presentation culture so that it's more team oriented. But sometimes I have bad success at that. We just have a very stubborn group that's just adamant that every single person has to graduate from perfect public speaking school, and they torture folks. And at that point, that's a decision on it as a business owner, as an agency that trains people and designs slides, that I have to say, is this client someone I want talking about me? Because now I'm set up to fail because I'm pushing people through an experience that they're just not comfortable with. So those are the hard decisions. And I try to opt out and say, hey, you know what? I don't think your company's ready at this moment. And come back to me when you guys are more interested in being fair about, I like the way you put it, about giving people value in what they bring to the table, and be that public speaking or whatnot. Yeah. The thing you mentioned about how to overcome fear and working with people, how to do that. The old adage was, just picture everybody in the audience as being naked. Yeah.
Underwear. Yes.
Is there any equivalent? to that you use actually with your clients? How do you help people overcome fear? So think of those academics. Was there some case there where you helped someone overcome the fear of standing up?
I think it's right. It's different for different audiences, and I'll just think about a few different examples. You can certainly remind them that in most cases, and when this isn't going to be the case, but in really almost every case, the room is rooting for you. The room is leaning in, and your job is to keep them leaning in. And so they're on your side. The second piece is reminding them this is a medium of communications, but the goal is much more compelling to some speakers in that something that if everyone else in the room buys into that and understands that, something good is going to happen. Something that is inspiring, insightful, brilliant. It's a left turn for the organization, whatever it is. But if you can present that well, you're actually, the goal here isn't to get through the end of the presentation, as you said earlier. You need to just get through it and survive and then, go take a nap. It's to move the organization or the conversation forward. And you're the one to do it because you know this story. So that's one piece. And another piece I want to
pause there though.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. You've got two pieces, but that's huge to me. Shifting the perception from focusing on the delivery to focusing on the gift giving.
Yeah.
Focusing on the fact that you're there to give something.
Yeah.
That's huge. Okay. So I just needed to take a moment and really analyze that. That was great. Now, what's the second piece?
Well, I think we kind of touched on it earlier, but I also one of the best things we can do is we're preparing a presentation, and I usually make this a writing exercise because it really helps to write it down, is to get your head into the audience's head. Get into their, I didn't say that well, get into their head and understand, who are they? When we do marketing exercises with my business clients, we try to, talk about target audiences and ideal, clients, and we sort of boil it down almost to a person, but we really try to understand, who are they? Why did they show up today? What do they understand today? And what do they not yet understand? What is their entry point into the conversation that you're going to start with this presentation? Meet them there. And that's also a little bit more, I think, forgiving than here is my formal presentation on all the things I know. It feels more like, hey, I'm meeting you where you're at. You all know these things to be true. And so that's where we're going to start. Now I'm going to unpack this piece that's going to keep you moving down the track with new knowledge, new analysis or research or findings that will help to teach you something new and help to. It also reminds you that I am the expert. If I'm the speaker, that I've put a lot into this, and if I do it well, I will certainly gain more respect and value in my organization. But in that moment, right now, I'm just trying to move the conversation. And so I think that piece. The other thing that I talk about a lot that I think it's easy to forget is, communications being the hammer. We haven't communicated anything. If what I say to you, Mike, you don't understand. If I suddenly started speaking Swahili, which I couldn't, but that'd be fun if I suddenly did that, wouldn't it? You wouldn't be able to, likely, unless you also speak Swahili, to receive what I have communicated. If I speak in a way that you can't understand what I think I want you to understand, then there's a disconnect. So communication hasn't happened at all. And so then I take that and I try to remind folks that ultimately, and this is, ultimately we're all kind of selfish. Ultimately, I am selfish not in the way that I want all the cookies in the cookie jar and I don't want to share them, although that may also be true. That's a different podcast.
I have a problem with that myself. Yeah.
I have a problem with that, but that's a different podcast. So but selfish in that when I'm taking in information, I'm constantly thinking about, how is this relevant to me? How is this useful to me? How does this build on my knowledge? Or is this information that I can use to make me, smarter, to help me survive, to help me, in any way, sort of personally, professionally. And it goes back to, we can go back to the primal days of storytelling around the fire pit and how people told stories in very exciting ways to keep you interested, but also to communicate that there's a Wolverine, a bear over there, and you've got to listen
for it. Don't go in that cannon.
Et
it's very
so
dangerous.
So you could survive. So you take in knowledge and you remember things because you need it in order to basic survival skills. Today, less so about the bear in most cases, but I'm selfish in how I take in information. If I'm in a talk and I'm listening to it and I think this isn't information I need. This isn't information that I'm interested in or I benefit from, or perhaps I even understand, I will turn off. And so as a speaker, it's our job to say, where are they coming from and what part of what I want to communicate is going to feel important and relevant to the audience.
And that changes from day to day, year to year. One thing I love to challenge clients with is the about us section of a presentation, where you came from, what your background is. And I'm like, I know that was a staple for many decades, but now you need to understand the context of culture being, they've probably looked at your About Us page on your website. They probably glanced at your LinkedIn bio.
Yeah.
That is not as vital as it once was. Really, those folks want the information that's going to help them take the next step. So what is that information? What is relevant to them? Yeah. And the other thing that you were saying about selfishness, great point. Do you find some of that selfishness is also in the prep of saying, I've spent so many years learning this. I have other duties. I don't want to take the time, or I can't physically, mentally take the time to think about how you're going to understand it. I can't figure out what your day is like. Let me just put it out there and you've got to untangle it.
It's more work. I think you're right. And I think it's more work. And especially for people who do a lot of public speaking, it might feel too hard because they do get asked to speak and they have been invited back. But I think that what I enjoy about taking that tack is I get much better feedback. At the end of the talk, people will come up to me or they'll come up to my clients and say, I was so moved. I understand something I didn't before. I can't wait to follow you in the future to learn more. This was a completely powerful experience to learn this content because we focused on the audience. If I want to talk about all the things I know, I can do it alone in my house and my dog can listen to me. But if I need you to engage with it, I've got to do it in the context of what you're going to care about. And it is hard. Back at Random House, one of my first bosses is a genius marketer, but he used to love to say, he's like, I love marketing. I love that I will only buy Crest toothpaste because my mother bought Crest toothpaste. But laundry detergent, whatever's on sale, don't care. And the psychology of understanding what moves people, we're coming back to that and understanding who's the audience. Which are they going to care about? Are they care about, their family tradition? Are they going to care about what's on sale? What will move them is more work, but profoundly more fulfilling. I mean, it's better for your career if you're giving great talks that, again, move that conversation forward. And it's more it's more fulfilling personally when you feel like you've given a group of people something great.
I agree. I think that the extra work is daunting for folks, and where to start doing that work is daunting. And it goes back to fear also, right? How many times have you noticed that someone was hesitating because they were afraid that they would get called out, that they weren't the expert that they were pretending to be? Talk to me about that. I would imagine in the academic policy space, there was some imposter syndrome fear. If I risk or say this too simply, they will think I'm an imposter.
It's funny. I've been thinking a lot about imposter syndrome in the last couple of years because now a lot of my days are working with small business owners, and it just abounds, right? It really abounds in just every career. And here's where I've come to land on imposter syndrome. I have started saying to people, you're going to have imposter syndrome until the day you die.
Yeah.
It is not, you're not going to get over it. I meet 70-year-olds with it. I meet 7-year-olds with it. Everyone's got it. And I almost want to make it a superpower. I almost want to turn it on its head and say, yes, I have it, but it's natural. It's very common. Everyone has it. I mean, really everyone, even the people who don't say they have it, they do. And it's part of what you've been on stages, Mike, when you're that adrenaline, when you're backstage, part of that is, I want to make sure people can see I do this well. I want to make sure that that fear of what's about to happen, you know your lines, you can do it. But the adrenaline that comes from imposter syndrome, I think is wonderful, because it gets you out of bed in the morning. It keeps you working hard. It makes you make sure that you are doing the best you can in your career, in your industry, in your business, in your talks, to bring your best game. And without that, it's not, you might not be as motivated. You might try to be like sliding along. Yeah, I've done this a million times. This is my dog and pony show. I'll pull this out of my hat. One of the hardest clients that I've had to work with has been clients who are experts who do a lot of public speaking. So recently I did a series with a bunch of regional executive directors of different organizations, and just keep the long version of the story short. But because they are constantly on the road, raising funds, talking to organizations, they are very confident speakers, and they're very good at what they do, even if they are bringing a vulnerability or a self-effacing kind of angle to it, but they know exactly how to do this talk. And in this case, I was hired to ask them to give a very different talk about their organizations.
Right.
And to get them to rethink everything about how they tell their story and unpack it and put it out all on the table, and then choose some pieces and throw away some others and bring in this other piece they've never thought of before, and then package it back up, is an incredible lift. But what they came to at the end was a story that not only really connected with this particular audience that we were creating an event for, that needed to hear a different kind of story and a theme across all of the speakers, but they each were left with a lot of confidence that they could do something different and better. I think we can. When you're an executive director for 15 years, if it was me, there's no doubt I would tell the same talk over and over and over, because it worked last time. It'll be fine. It'll work this time. I'm very busy. It's hard. But where we forced them to take some time to sort of rethink how they tell the story and what are those elements and which parts matter to this audience. They were really, I think, pretty inspired by the work. They hated me in the middle. They always hate me in the middle. I'm a bit of a torture agent, but at the end, I think they really liked what came out of it.
What a great experience for you to go through, though, because getting people set in their ways who are actually good and telling them that's great in that context, but now we're going to rebuild this on another context, another application of what you know. That's fun. That is fun. And
I think you see this all the time. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
cool.
You see this all the time. It's the best part of coaching people because they're already experts. I have no idea how to do what they do. None of them. They're all brilliant experts at what they do. To just help them to bring into storytelling and to rethink all of these pieces we've been talking about who's the audience and making yourself more vulnerable and showing that this is a journey you're still on and you don't know everything, brings so much more, I think, joy to your career and your ability to really connect with folks who are inspired by you. It is the most fun work.
Yeah, totally. I love getting out of bed every morning and doing what I do. Thinking back to the daunting challenge of organizing that information and rebuilding it like you're talking about, I want to make sure we leave people who listen to this podcast with some actionable advice. Can you describe your process when you enter into an engagement with someone in helping them to organize their talk? What are the steps you take? or that you tend to take? Or does it change every time? How do tackle it?
Again, I'm selfish, so I tend to make it what's fun for me, which is to start by just getting them to talk a lot. I ask them a million questions, and I joke that my favorite place is to be the dumbest one in the room. I'm always the dumbest one in the room because I have no idea what they're talking about. And so I get to ask those silly, silly questions that their colleagues can't ask because they're all supposed to know what X means. So I get to really understand, and they get to really explore explaining something to someone new. And in that, we can see where the nuggets are, where they light up, and then we talk about what is our goal here? Who are we trying to tell a story to, and why? Why do we even need to do this talk? Is it a paper? Is it a white paper? Is it a video? What does this need to be? And if a live presentation is the way to go, what does that, what are those pieces that need to exist? So we always start with who's in the audience. What do you want them to remember a week later at that cocktail party? Okay. And when they're asked, what did the speaker talk about? What would you, is there a call to action that you want them to have? And then that sort of starts you building your framework. And you can start by saying, okay, well, if the audience doesn't know these three things yet, I'm going to start by, talking about not so much myself, but the premise that we're going to build that foundation. So we're all on the same page as we then move forward. I might talk about what they currently may think to be true, or I might try to refer to examples that they're familiar with, and then move it from there. The key is to always thinking about the person in the audience and say, are they going to follow this thread? Are they going to stick along? Are they going to stay along for the ride? Right. Is this where they're going to fall off? Is this one too many slides of data? Where do we get to that might lose them? And then and then we work on that piece. But as you know, we spend weeks and weeks and weeks drafting and rewriting and meeting on, video calls or in person, and we keep working it. This is not a 2-week process. And that's part of what people have to sort of buy into.
Hopefully it's not. Yeah. So it's a more extensive process. Get people comfortable with that. And to recap, know the audience. Figure out who that audience is. Figure out what they need.
Yep.
Figure out what pieces they're going to need to know to get them there, and then leave them with a call to action. Is that pretty much?
Yeah, I think that's those are all the really important elements. I would say, keeping in mind how people take in information. I'm often reminded, people learn in different ways. And so it's not that graphs are bad, and it's not that speaking a lot is bad. It's making sure that you're presenting things in a way that people can digest. And if there is a key element, building that in and having some repetition of that throughout the talk, just to maybe unpack it in a few different ways. But also not trying to, I say the last thing is, we all know a lot of things, especially at this, at this point in our career. We've done a lot of things. We know a lot. And don't try to tell all of the things. Everything in the talk needs to come back to that key piece. If it doesn't, it gets cut. Every editor knows it's called killing your darlings, right? It's pulling out those pieces. Oh, that was such a great paragraph. But if it doesn't relate to what this talk needs to be, save it for another day.
Yeah. Don't fall in love with all those extra pieces. I always say, don't assume this is the last time you're going to talk to this crowd. Just assume you're going to.
That's great. Yeah.
Just assume you're going to see them again. And so if that's the case, what do you need to tell them today? Yep. Yeah. All right. So, scariest moment you've ever had, either professionally or training someone. What is the scariest professional moment you've had?
It's not a great story, but it was a lot of adrenaline. I ran a series of talks for the National Rural Assembly. I was on their advisory board for years, and they would have national conferences. This is a collaboration of hundreds and hundreds of regional organizations that focus on rural communities. And similar to a lot of projects I've done, we were producing a series of talks with about 11 people, getting up and giving a short, really poppy story to really inspire this large room at the national conference. And the slide deck disappeared. And, and the sound, died and everything. And so suddenly you have, a room with, 1,500 people, and one scared person standing at the podium doesn't know what to do. And me just running around the room. Everyone has to wait.
Checking every plug. Figure it out. Yeah.
That was the day I learned about contingency plans and printing things out and being able to wing it and all of, but it was, and
also knowing your material where you could get up without presentations at AB. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's a contingency plan, definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I know we're close to time, but I was hoping, I was surprised and delighted to see the list of names of presidents that you've actually worked with. So are you okay if we do a little quick fire segment where I blurt out the president's name and you tell me your impression of that person? Are you okay doing that?
Yes.
All right, let's go.
Jimmy
Carter.
Jimmy Carter republished his books of poetry, and I got to tour with him on different books of poetry. Very, very kind, very confident, and yet very gentle with his audiences. Obviously, we were dealing with massive audiences for those book signings around the country, and he was very, very sweet.
Nice. Humble, sounds like. He knew how to approach the audience in a humble way. Nice. Well, that matches with his personal persona. Bill Clinton,
Clinton, we just published books of his speeches. This was the Times Books, which is in print at Random House, which sadly no longer exists. Just what everyone says about him, just incredibly charismatic. Just terrifically friendly. Everyone instantly likes him. Biggest smile, great eye contact. But just the most natural charisma you've ever seen.
That's awesome. All right, gotta ask. He's the polarizing figure of our time, Donald J. Trump.
I think, sadly, I'm going to leave most of what I could say there until he is no longer a candidate for president. But I'll say this, and this is just a teaser.
Teaser for a yet published book by Amy Sterndale.
Published book. There will not be a book, and I won't say anything here that's going to get me any media attention. But a disagreement with Donald Trump is the reason I left New York City. And that's not to say that he knows that. It was just a decision that I made after working with him and sort of reevaluating my life journey and realizing. And so I joke that he's responsible for, some of the great things that have happened in my life since I left New York. And but he is exactly who you think he is. And he was before he was president. We published his business books at the time.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. One other question I'm curious about your thoughts about. I feel like there is so much information out there about how to be politically savvy, and we're talking about presidents, we're talking about policy, about spin and counterspin, how to pivot from a question you don't want to answer to a question you know the answer to. Does communication need a reboot? Do you think that corporate communication, the way we speak to each other, we got to get less savvy. We got to get more authentic. I mean, I don't want to lead the witness here, but what do you think?
No, I completely agree, because I think as professionals, we get very frustrated when we see those spin, they're not answering the question. This is the canned answer that they were prepared with. And it's very frustrating to listen to in real time, because you think, this is, they were prepared for this and this is what they're going to do instead of answering. But I think where it's a hard time, I think, for any, presidential candidate to sort of show that vulnerability. But I think as we have been saying throughout this hour, there's so much power in it. And there's so much power in being imperfect and acknowledging everything hasn't gone perfectly, but we're not going to give up. And we've learned this lesson, and now we're going to work in this way, would be such a more compelling answer than I'd like to talk instead about my policy over here and just try to distract.
Yeah. All right, cool. So move towards a more humble, authentic, honest interchange.
I can't imagine how scary it would be to be a politician taking that tack, but I think I would be inspired all day long.
Yeah, and I think it's bled outside of politics. I used to work with energy folks, and there was a section of my agency that would actually train people on PR tactics. So when people are getting too close to talking about the way you polluted that lake, here's how you pivot to something else. And it just would leave this hole in my soul to witness that we were training business people to speak like that, when I think it's much more refreshing to say, you know what, I really don't want to talk about that. Like, I'm not prepared to. I don't want to talk about it. Take it for what you want, but I'm not here to talk about that today. And that to me feels more honest.
It is more honest. I think the other piece of that, where I think it can work sometimes, that probably the more work could be done. I know this has been a very difficult time in journalism. The last decade, 2 decades of all of the changes that have gone on in the business of journalism. I have no judgment on how hard it has been for journalists. But where there can be relationships built on trust between leadership and storytellers in the media, we can find more room for those conversations. And if I had a little more trust in a journalist I was talking to, that they wouldn't spin it in a way that could ruin me by Tuesday, I would be more likely to explore. And I say me as though I'm a politician. Of course I'm not, but I think leaders would be more likely to be willing to explore that vulnerability.
Well said.
Yeah.
All right. I think I'm going to leave it there. Amy, it's been a pleasure. Is there anything that you want the audience to know? Is there a way they can learn more about you and what you do?
I'm in the middle of redoing my website at sterndalestrategic.com. So give me a hot second before, but you can sign up for updates there. I loved this conversation because, as you can tell, I'm so, it's such joy to think about how to help people tell better stories and reach the audiences they want to reach. So often they miss the mark. And I would just leave people with, if you want to do it, some people don't, and that's great. But if you want to figure this out, you absolutely can do it. I love that you're doing this podcast to give people these nuggets, to build their confidence. But so many great speakers started out just finding their way and experimenting with what works for them. And absolutely, everyone can do this, and it's really fun.
Yeah, find the teacher that works for you, whether that teacher is a book or a video or an actual person. Yeah. Amy, thanks again. Have a wonderful day.
And so much.
See you on the flip side.
See you on the flip side. Bye.
All right, take care.